Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have my interview with Scott Koblish, an artist, a man so into comics. He started at the Cooper School at 9 years old, going in, soaking up the knowledge, which he put to good use as one of the Romita Raiders, an inker for Marvel, where he worked on things like G.I. Joe, Excalibur, Avengers, basically everything, and then moved on to penciling, starting with The Weapon, a miniseries from Platinum Comics, then all over DC and Marvel. And particularly, you may know him from a 6 year run on Deadpool. And he also, you may know him from the mural-like images he's been creating with hundreds of characters on them, specifically, most recently, for the History of the DC Universe project. He also had a comic strip called The Many Deaths of Scott Koblish. He's doing all kinds of amazing stuff. So let's get to it. This is Scott Koblish, Mr. Scott Koblish on the program. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Super.
Yeah.
We were just talking before we started recording. I have some of your magnificent cover art in the background for the History of the DC Universe project,
Yes.
which we will get to. We have to know how you possibly tackle such an image. But we start by rewinding all the way to the beginning to ask, how did you first discover comics?
Oh, interesting. So as near as I can remember, I kind of came into comics sideways. I had seen there was the Ralph Bakshi Spider-Man animated series was on like reruns when I was a kid, and I would watch those, and I was fascinated by them. I really liked the Spider-Man stuff, and then Batman 2. There was a Batman show. And then at some point, there was I used to read the newspaper obsessively when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and mostly because I was a big Yankees fan. And I would try and figure out the math for figuring out where everybody was in the standings and stuff like that, because that was around the time that the Yankees were actually doing really well. And so I'd follow that obsessively, and then I realized that there was a Spider-Man comic in the newspaper, and John Romita Sr. was the artist on it, and Stan wrote it. And I followed that obsessively for at least a year, and then I realized at some point I got sick or something like that, and somebody bought me some comics. I think my mom, and then my cousins also were collecting comics. They were a few years older than I was, so they were really into some of the cosmic stuff in the 70s at Marvel. And my uncle, their father, my uncle was friends with a colorist who worked at Marvel, Bob Sharon. And he was a colorist. He did a lot of stuff in the 70s and 80s at Marvel. And so ostensibly, my mother knew that there was like a career and that there was, like a that you could be a cartoonist. So at like age 7, I decided that I was going to be a cartoonist. I was going to draw comic books, and then my there was a school that opened up around that time. In I lived in New Jersey, and it was about 20 minutes, 30 minutes away from us. And there was a Saturday class that you could take, and that was the Joe Kubert School for cartooning and graphic art. And and I started going there when I was like about 9. So there, Joe would teach the classes. So it was just Joe, doing a lecture, and then you would sit and draw afterwards. And I did that for, I want to say like 6 or 7 years. So yeah. So I started reading comics around, like late 70s. I was a big Spider-Man fan at first. It's funny because I read an interview with Jim Shooter once where he was saying that when he first started working at Marvel, or when he first got in control of everything as editor in chief, he said he had a meeting with everybody, and the reprint titles were doing the for like Spider-Man, were doing like the same villain for that month that like the regular title was doing, and he had said that someone was going to get confused, and that person was me, because I was picking up the comic, and I was also picking up the reprint titles, and I didn't really realize like what was different. Like there was a little box in the bottom that was like in yellow, and it said like reprinted from Spider-Man 125 or 124 or something like that. So I the first real Spider-Man comic that I picked up was I picked up two. So well, I picked up four. So I picked up four, and I don't know, it's hard. Back then there were no comic shops, so it was all just kind of catch as catch can. So the storylines, there was two storylines. There was one with the Man Wolf, and it was the first issue that I was reading was Man Wolf. It was the first appearance of Man Wolf back in 1970 or 71 or something like that, but it had been reprinted. So it was just after Gwen Stacy had died, and and it was this gorgeous art with Gil Kane and John Romita Sr. doing like just the best work of I think either person's career, and it was gorgeous, and like and then at the end of that episode, like Man Wolf becomes Man Wolf, and he's hunting down J. Jonah Jameson, and the cover is like he's my son, that kind of thing, and but at the end of that issue, Spider-Man is on a rooftop, and Man Wolf is about to jump him, you know, and then they cut away, and they're like, to be continued. And then the next issue I read that I had in my hands was like issue 189 or 190, and it was a John Byrne story, oddly enough, doing the art chores on it, and it was a Man Wolf. So it was, but he was dressed kind of in like rags, like almost like a mummy kind of thing. But they were still on the roof top, and Spider-Man was there, and Man Wolf was there. This time he had J. Jonah Jameson with him, but I thought, okay, this is the same story. You know what I mean? Like I thought this is the exact, and I just couldn't square the two storylines completely together, but I mean they were almost the same thing, because it was like J. Jonah Jameson was the father, and he was racked with agony over the fact that his son is this wolf creature, and it's the same problem. It's he's got this it was like a diamond or a jewel that was sort of in his
Like
throat.
pendant
Yeah,
or
a
something.
pennant
Yeah.
kind of thing, but it was attached to his body at this point, like, so I kind of followed it, I followed it pretty well, and I was like, oh, well, this is just the same story. And making matters worse, the other two comics that I had were, it was a vulture story where, again, at the end of the episode, like the issue, the vulture is just about to fly down and attack Spider-Man, and then the next issue, I had like a vulture story that was kind of current, and the same thing, the vulture's just about to attack him. So I just pieced these two together, and I just thought, well, this is what comics are. They're deeply confusing. They have a tremendous they have a tremendous amount of storylines that I kind of knew some of it. Like I had watched the Bakshi Spider-Man animated series, so I knew the villains. Like if Mysterio was in the newspaper strip, I thought this is great. I know Mysterio from the TV show. Like I'd already seen like essentially the origin of Mysterio, and then they started putting out like a little pocket kind of comics, like small pockets of Ditko's early stuff. So I got to read those. So although I read the second appearance of Doctor Octopus before the first appearance that I read, but that kind of thing. So like what would happen is that Marvel had been around for, at that point, I want to say like 17 years or 16 years, enough to create like a tremendous back catalog that you could kind of find here and there, and then allude to, like, they would have these little editors notes, this character appeared in this issue, or this character appeared in that issue, almost like a hyperlink, really, like
Yeah.
you'd be at the bottom, and you'd try and find that issue, you'd go go to old bookstores and try and find like the issue that it's in. Do you know what I mean? So that was the kind of stuff that I was immediately sort of doing, So that's comics were baffling and confusing, and but what you could wrap your hands around it, the core concepts of everybody was really easy. So like Superman, there's a core concept. Batman, there's a core concept. Spider-Man, the same. X-Men, like you could just wrap your hands around the general idea, and then you could sort of piece together like where you were. Like my grandmother used to watch Days of Our Lives and things like that,
Hmm.
and these things predated my existence, but they were the same storyline basically. But you could pick it up pretty quickly. Like you knew that this person was a jerk and this person is a good person. Like I think people make too much out of storylines being confusing. I think that it actually helps comics to have comics that are confusing because that's what hooked me. Like I immediately wanted to know more about the
Right.
situation. It was a stick in my craw. Like I would just go like, well, I don't understand exactly. I love this thing, but I don't understand it exactly because I haven't seen all of it.
Yeah.
So let me try and find all of it. Like I would go out of my way to find all of it, which I think is part of the charm, is part of the allure of the whole thing, because it's not a simple story. Like like the Donald Duck stories that I would run across, they just weren't interesting to me because it wasn't like Donald Duck was in any mortal peril that he didn't get out of at the end of that story.
Right.
So what winds up happening in a story like that is that you have a situation where the character gets into some sort of trouble, but it's resolved at the end. It's almost like um, it's almost like so in the movies in the early 70s, there were a lot of these auteur movies like Godfather and all these things. And there were a whole bunch of movies where it was clear that the director wanted, like they had a 3 hour cut. Do you know what I mean? Or a two and a
Yeah.
half hour cut. And then the studio would say, no, it's going to be 75 minutes. You know what I mean? So they cut out all this stuff and they wind up cutting out narrative. They wind up cutting out all sorts of stuff that's actually in the narrative. And it winds up that these movies come out. And then years later, you find out that the reason, something happened in the story was because this was cut out, and then would explain the actual situation. So, but I think that what happened is that because people would watch these movies and didn't quite understand exactly what was happening, they would have this situation where they would go out afterwards with their friends and argue about it. Like you sit there at the movie, you watch it, doesn't make 100% of sense, and then you spend the rest of your lives talking about it with your friends. You go, why did that character do this? And then you make up your own story essentially to try to fill in the blanks. And that's what I was doing with comics. You know what I mean? I would try and fill in the blanks. And of course, because I was drawing all the time since I was like 2 or 3, I would sit there and in between the issues, I would draw what I thought was going to happen next, or I would draw, like what I kind of, had some sort of thought process where I was like, why doesn't this make sense? And I would draw out that kind of thing, or, so that was really what happened for me is I was just obsessed with essentially confusing information and then and then just sort of built a career from there.
Well, it seems like it was not only a hobby to you or something interesting, but it was like a passion right from the word go.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, like I said, I knew what I wanted to do at 7 years old. Years later, I had a child. I would meet 7 year olds because you don't normally meet a lot of 7 year olds unless you have a 7 year old. And then I realized I would never take career advice from any one of these little kids. Like, but I took career advice from myself. I was like, oh, I'm going to be, a cartoonist. It's like someone's little kids that, when you talk to them, they're, oh, I want to be an astronaut. And you're like, sure, sure, you'll be an
one
astronaut.
day, one
Yeah,
day.
yeah. But I was like, oh, I want to draw comic books. And it's still plan A.
Yeah. I
50
mean,
years.
I like to ask also, and it seems like it was early on for you when you realize, you get very involved in the stories, right?
Yeah.
And the characters.
Oh, yeah.
And in your case and in many other cases, like it's going back and trying to find the references from
Yeah.
previous issues and things like that. But there's also like sort of an epiphany when you realize that, hey, there are people making these things.
Yes.
There's like a writer, there's an artist, there's
Yeah.
a,
And the
colorist and
Marvel
all that kind of
comics,
stuff.
yeah, all of them had like credits, you know what I mean? So you
Yeah.
realize that there was a person, that was doing this sort of thing, like years into it, like when I was 11 or 12, I found all these interview magazines like the Comics Journal, or one thing that completely blew my mind was there was something called the X-Men Companion or something like that. And there was a volume one and a volume two. And by this time, I had a comic shop that I could order things from. And that was a Peter Sanderson had interviewed like everyone had who had anything to do with the X-Men that were still around, and had this. It was each book was like 200 pages or something like that, but it was just an interview, and I just ate up those interviews. I still to this day like read any interview I can get my hands on from any of these creators. So I was obsessed. I was like I knew. And then, of course, when I'm sitting there in class with Joe Kubert, like, at 9, that Joe works in comics, like so, and he was very adamant about this being a job. This is a there's deadlines, there's you have to sit and draw every day. I mean, he even pulled me aside at some point and he said, I don't, I was probably like 10 or 11, and he pulled me aside and he said, I don't know that this business is for you. And I was like, why? And he said, well, he's like, you can't stop talking. And this is the loneliest job that anybody can ever have. You're going to spend almost all of your life alone drawing. This is not a like you're communicating with people, but you're communicating in this weird time frame
Right.
where you're making the story over a long period of time, like a month, and then you're sending that story out in the world for someone to read in like 5 minutes. So it's like all of your communication sense has to be shoved into this thing, and I talked too much as a kid, I guess I would kind of get Joe wound up, like I would sit there in class, and he'd show us the front view, side view, profile, kinds of things that he would try to get everybody to learn how to draw. And I from the back row, I'd be like, well, is that all you can draw? Just to kind of get him wound up. And I figured, like, if I could get him wound up, I loved hearing him talk. So like I could get him to talk for his lecture was supposed to be an hour, but I could get him to be about an hour and a half if I peppered him with questions, or made fun of him, or like that kind of thing. I don't know how he dealt with it, because honestly, like, I would have lost my mind if there was this bratty little kid like in the back row, like, and he wouldn't, and I wouldn't go away. I determined that I was going to be in comics, like, so, when you're not 9 years old or 10 years old and you're sticking around, like, it's kind of weird. And of course, Joe had started when he was like 12 or something like that. So I guess for him, he was like, well, this is how this bug hits somebody and it never leaves, Joe would go to instead of going to school, he would go and try and pitch stories to the publishers and stuff like that. And like the guy was skipping high school all the time. So anyway, that was the kind of stuff that I'd pepper Joe with. But his whole general idea was that he felt that it wasn't going to be for me because I just talked and talked and talked.
Right.
So
Well, you certainly proved him wrong.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I showed him. That's honestly, what really winds up happening is most people, you'll find that somewhere along the line in their lives they have a moment where they're like, I'm gonna show that guy, and
Right.
I guess Joe is mine, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna show this old man I can do it.
Was he your conduit to Marvel after, I mean, I know you went to SVA, right?
Yeah,
And then started up somehow at Marvel.
yeah,
Did you do
so
that on your own, or was there some sort of pathway
I
from the
did
Kubert
wind up
school?
doing that on my own. I went to Kubert School until I was about 15 or 16. That there just wasn't anything else they could kind of teach me in that class. Like, we'd gone over the basics a million times. And I mean, at some point, they didn't really know what to do with me at all. They put me up on the second floor, like with all the lights out, except for this one like desk lamp that I had. So I would just be up there, and they'd give me old scripts from like Atari Force backup scripts and things like that, and I would draw those, like, or at least do my best to try and draw those. And but at 15 or 16, I I sort of grew out of it, and then like I went to vocational technical school for cartooning, and well, it wasn't really for cartooning; it was for graphic art.
Yeah.
And then I went to SVA, and there I bumped into Eisner because Eisner was teaching at the time. Salamandola was teaching at the time. I left a year before Walt Simonson started teaching there, which I would have loved to have had a class with Walt. But and then Joe Orlando was teaching there. And Joe at some point was like, "Oh, well, give me a call and I'll set up a time you can come into the DC offices." And I thought, "Well, this is great." And the semester ends, and graduate, and then I call up, and his secretary is like, "Oh no, hon, we're not gonna. You don't come in." So I was like, "Oh, geez,"
Must
like,
have been deflating.
yeah, I was like, "Oh, this is my one way in." But anyway, so I didn't get that at all, and then I worked on my portfolio a little bit more, and then I wound up taking a job doing like selling video cassette tapes door to door in business districts. So like I was making really good money doing that. It was like sports bloopers for of the AFL leagues and the it wasn't even the NFL, but it was like sports bloopers of football. And I was making like I don't know, like 1,500 a week. Like it was a great job. Like it was freaking awesome. But it was killing me inside because I didn't have any way of getting into comics. Like I would kind of killing myself slowly with this sales job. And a girlfriend of mine at the time was like, "You got to go. There's this guy that's doing a signing in the Morris County Mall, which was the headquarters mall in Morristown, which is the town that I was kind of grew up in. And it was like this unfinished mall. It was never when I was there. It was never finished. Like we ran the Ben and Jerry's out of it was like the only Ben and Jerry's that ever failed. So it was just like it was this mall that we just never went to. But John Romita Sr. was sort of signing comics there. I don't know why at all. He didn't really do that. He didn't really do it very often. But at any rate, Virginia was running the line, and I had my portfolio. And my girlfriend dropped me off, and I had my portfolio, and I showed it to him, and and he was like, "This is great. Like, can you send me Xeroxes of this?" And he gave me the address, and I sent him Xeroxes, and then he sent me back. It was kind of funny. He sent me back like he was like, "Hey, fix this and fix this," and I was like, "All right, okay." And then I did. I made some panels bigger, or I moved some things around, and then I sent it back, and then I started sending it to the editors at the office, and I wasn't getting any response back at all. And I called. I had John's number at this point, so I called him up a couple times, and at some point he said, "Look, there's a fine line between being, persistent and being a pest, and you are now fully in pest mode." And I was like, "Oh fuck." So I just went back to my job. I thought this is terrible, and but I did try to meet with some other cartoonists. Like I met with Lee Weeks, and he was amazing. Like I had missed what Lee Weeks was. Someone had sort of pointed me. They were like, "Oh, this guy is over here. He does comic books. I know him." And I went there, and I was like, I was humiliated immediately. I was like, "He's so freaking good." Like I was like, I wasn't going to show him my portfolio. I don't think I left having shown him my portfolio. I just looked at his work, which is astounding. And then I did manage to meet up with Bob Sharon, my uncle's friend. And Bob was kind of funny because he was really into astrology at the time, and he was like, "Let me get your like birthday and birth time and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." And I gave it to him, and then I go back to my sales job, and then he left a message on my answering machine in a panic. He was like a panicked kind of voice. He was like, "You have to get out of that job. You have to be an artist, or you're never going to be happy." And I was like, "Oh shit." because I didn't see any way in at that point. Like I didn't really know how, Joe Orlando would close the door. Like John Romita Sr. was kind of like, don't call me, I'll call you kind of thing. And then like, and I just didn't know how to get in. Like, I just, it was kind of like a black box for me. I didn't really understand. I'd gone to one or two conventions. Like I met Ron Friends and he was like, I don't know, I can tell you anything else to do here, but I had a problem at that age of I wouldn't finish every panel on the page. I don't really know what problem I was having, but I would get blocked on something. So he was like, finish everything. That was his advice. And it's good advice. So, but I wound up John's assistant, Steve Geiger, called me like right around Christmas time and he was like, "Hey, we have this job for you. It's like a Romita Raider." It was like a so John had a like an apprentice program at the office there, and I was like, "I'll take it." And it was for minimum wage, so I went from making 1,500 a week to making $500 a month. So like it was a huge blow, and I was kind of upset about it because like I really didn't expect to be making 500 a month. My rent was 600, so like I really wound up struggling over the next couple months during in that job to pay for things. I bounced a check just to get the train fare like for at some point during the like by like July, so it was really struggling for that job. But what was great is that there was another artist that would come into the offices. His name was Keith Williams, and he was an inker. And Keith was a raider at some point in the '80s, so he kind of he knew that we were all apprenticing,
Right.
and he would say, hey, can you do these backgrounds for me? And I was like, sure, I'll do as many as you want. And he paid me like $19 a page, and it's honestly saved me. Um, but what wound up happening is that because I was doing these background inks, and because Joe had taught me how to ink, and Eisner had taught me how to ink, like I had a real like it was a real shaky kind of brush line, is basically the way I would put it, because I was always trying to give it a little life. Like what I liked about Eisner's work and what I liked about Kubert's work was that it had a certain kind of like like a flow and a kind of energy about it
Yeah.
that wasn't just taken out of by using technical pens or using quills and things like that. And the current art du jour at the time was the image style. So this is back in '93. So everybody wanted an inker who was going to do because you just there's only one Scott Williams, or there's only one R.T. Barrett. There's only a few of these guys that can handle that kind of stuff, and that everybody wanted them for their
Yeah.
artwork. So I wound up inking and learning kind of that style, I was pretty good with a quill, and I used to letter with a brush. Like I kind of put my brush aside and went into this kind of quill and rapidograph kind of work. And I just started, I needed money. So I just started inking any projects that they could. I did some stuff for, like 2 pages here, 2 pages there, a project with, for the Marvel Comics Presents. I did a whole bunch of those. By the time I got Moon Knight, I was like, well, this is great. I have enough freelance now. I can leave the Raider program. You weren't supposed to be there for more than a year anyway. It was an apprentice program, and
Yeah.
I mean part of the reason that they were paying $4.25 an hour was that they were trying to starve you into finding some other way of making a living. So I have to give them credit, because a lot of guys, I think that what would happen is that you would, if given the opportunity, you would just sort of stay there and do whatever the work was there. Like a lot of people, me included, just wanted to be in comics. So like you would have one or two people just being there the whole time. And since it was an apprentice program, you wanted to have people sort of cycling through that way you could help people understand. It was great for understanding what was happening in the office. The office was terrific. It was it was fast paced. At the time, the summer that I was at Marvel, they put out 128 books in a month. So it was a lot of product. We were just shoving stuff out the door. So I was really grateful because I was able to get some things here and there, so I could start a career basically just being like, I was just rescuing people for a long time. Like, I don't really understand it, but a lot of editors kind of run or they used to run their projects where, everything was like, it was all on fire. There was always an emergency there, but then you'd find out that like you'd see like pages building up in their desk for a week, for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, like they go like, "Hey, I need these 5 pages inked tonight," and you'd go, "All right," I'd say, "Well, okay, I'll work." I would have 14 hours or 15 hours, and I would break it up. I'd go, "All right, it's 3 hours on this page, 3 hours on that page, 3 hours on that page," just to try and keep the pace up, to try and get the pages done, and then
Yeah.
you hand it in, and we weren't sleeping at the time. I didn't need sleep as much as, I mean, you kind of need sleep, but you don't.
Not when
When
you're young and hungry.
yeah, well, that's exactly it. I wanted to work in comics. I wanted to do it, and I was one of the people that could do it. Like I
Right.
knew enough about how to draw that I could be a pretty good inker. And I kind of latched on to Al Williamson's style, like I felt was an old time kind of style that was able to kind of make the transition. Like so, like I said, a lot of people wanted to be Scott Williams. I wanted to be Al Williamson. I just thought his line had this life and almost a shakiness to it that like I really idolized. I just thought he had such life. He was working on Daredevil and Spider-Man 2099, and I would look at it and I would say like, what were the original pencils? So yeah, I'd be in the office and I'd see the original pencils that Rick Leonardi would hand in, and they would have areas for black. It would just be this giant black area, and when it came back from Al, it was almost filled in. It was like there would be little sections that were kind of left out. It would give it a little life, a little energy, a little texture to it that wasn't there previous. And he would draw all the mechanical stuff freehand. All the buildings and things like that. Like everything was all freehand. So he would literally draw a line that would start, and it would go 17 inches all the way down, like just one straight line, and no break in it whatsoever. Like, he was using in your arm, and when you're drawing, you have a number of pivot points. So like you have a pivot point where your thumb and your forefinger and your middle finger. Some people draw with other fingers as well, but like and then you've got your knuckles as another pivot point, and you've got your wrist as another pivot point, your elbow, and then your shoulder, and then actually your entire body really is another pivot point from your hips you can do. But that you could tell that his line, like if he's doing a 17-inch line, he's pivoting from his shoulder. He would draw, like you move it down straight. It's just another a place that you're going to be pivoting that line off of. So like I was obsessed with his ink line. I thought he was just terrific. I kind of fell into that messier kind of inking at times too, like Klaus Janson. Klaus was, you could look at Klaus's work and you could see there was an understanding of structure in Klaus's work, and an understanding of what you could leave out. And I don't really know how to exactly to describe Klaus's work. It's almost like it's overworked in some spots, and then it's missing from other places. I don't really know how to describe it exactly. It's that Sienkiewicz kind of thing. Like it's like there's a heavy attention to detail, and then like that attention to detail vanishes when it's not needed. So anyway, that's the kind of inking that I was sort of drawn toward. But it wasn't popular back then. So I could draw, like I could ink the way that like Scott Williams would ink, but I just don't have that kind of patience really. So I was able to do it in small bursts. So like I said, I would do 5 pages here, or an issue of this here, or an issue of that there. I was averaging about 100 pages a week, or 100 pages a month, 80 pages a month, like that kind of thing. 60 if it was a bad month. But I was just working constantly. At some point I moved into New York, and just at that point I just dove into like being there all the time. I was in the offices 3 days a week. People would just walk up to me and say, like, all the rats abandoned the ship on the last issue of a Black Wolf, which was an Eternal spin-off, and they would go like, quick, can you ink these 7 pages in the next 2 days? Or the regular inker for Steve Ditko like bailed, and can you ink these pages, like and Steve stuff is one of the only people I said no to, which I kind of regret. I would have liked to have at least made a stab at inking over Ditko, but so Ditko has this thing where he had that objectivist kind of perspective. It was I'm being paid for a certain thing, and I'm not going to do any more or any less than like I think I'm being paid for. So when it would come time, the pages that I was handed, at least to try and they were like, "Will you do this?" were pages of what were there pages of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, because Steve was more than willing to work at Marvel, no problem, but he just didn't want to work on Spider-Man or Doctor Strange. So he'd work on Rom or Machine Man, or like anything that nobody expected him to do. He would go and do. So like, they were just mannequins. They were like mannequins with like the names of like each Power Ranger on the mannequin, and I was like, I'm not doing his work for him. I understand that objectivist theory, and I am going to employ it in this particular task. Like I am going to say thank you, but no. And it actually gave me an opportunity to sort of think about what it was that I was going to say no to, and unfortunately it was that. But it the entire experience, because I was inking over so many different people, I got to see a lot of different approaches. There's a big difference between Lee Weeks and one of the Kubert brothers, or any of the folks that I wound up inking over. Like Ron Friends, or Ron Garney, or any of the Rons.
Ron Lim.
And it was just interesting to see how everyone approached the story, how everyone approached tackling the concepts, and tackling the rigors of trying to get a book out every month. Some were way better at it than others. I don't know how to explain exactly how some artists have a real facility, like Mike Diodato is just a machine. Like,
Yeah.
and I'd never seen like that kind of fluid, kind of, but really entertaining, really energetic. The same with Ron Garney. Ron had a really interesting approach that I try and live up to this day. Like in my own art, just that it was very energetic. It had a greatness, like a bigness to it, that I kind of I love playing with, so it was nice. It was almost like an extended like apprenticeship, being an inker for as long as I was an inker.
When did you have the inkling, pun intended, I guess, that you wanted to, move out of inking and move back into actually illustrating and penciling?
Oh, I wanted to do it from day one. I got well. It's funny. I remember Mike Chen, who used to work. He was at the Kubert School at some point, and I think he pulled me aside at some point because I enjoyed inking. I thought it was funny to watch Joe Kubert because a lot of his drawing happened in his inking. Like he would draw like he would just draw like like an in blue line, like a little like vague like a oval, and he'd draw like two lines straight down, or one line straight down and one line across, so like a horizontal and a vertical, and that would sort of indicate where he would felt that he was going to put the eyes and the nose and the center line of the face, and he would just take out a brush and he would just start inking in the details. Like I don't, he would never put in the pencils. So I kind of tried to do it that way. I I made a lot of mistakes, that way. But I just thought, well, inking is where the real artwork takes place, like so I and Eisner the same. Eisner was a very heavy-handed inker as far as his work, and a lot of the energy and a lot of the experimentation happened in these ink line. And I just took it at that, that was what cartoonists did, like you did everything from the top to the bottom, but I realized by the time I was inking like stuff here and there at Marvel, when the thing that Mike Chen had warned me about was that if you don't want to ink, don't ink. So what wound up happening is that I was pretty good at inking. All those years I had learned how to handle a brush and pen, and from Joe, and unfortunately, once an editor finds you're useful for a particular thing, they never let you go. You know what I mean? They never let you
Yeah.
move into something else. So I wanted desperately to move out of inking, but I was paying my own way, so I didn't want to. It was not like I could go back to my parents or anything like that. So I always like I was out on my own. So I just needed to make money, and I would do all these inking jobs, and then I just got kind of you get pigeonholed, and what winds up happening, I would hand in samples of my pencils, and I'd say, here's my work, and they would go, yeah, I don't really need you to do that. Can you do this inking job tonight? And I'd go like, yeah, I can do this inking job, like no problem. I'll continue to do that. And I made my own comic at some point called Skate, and I shopped that around at some point, and what I wound up happening is I wound up getting, this is years it took because I was inking and drawing Skate like in between the raindrops, so it took me like 2 years to draw the first issue of Skate, like 24 pages. But I did a great job with it. I was super happy with it, but it's like I started working at Stanley Media, like I started doing some animation here and there. I went back to inking for a while. It just it took forever to get out of the inking ghetto that I was in. And I love my inky brethren. Like I'm not casting aspersions. It's just one of those things where to do I wanted to do it from top to bottom. I didn't want to just do the inking because you feel like you're a backseat driver. Basically, you're like, no, no, left. There's only, and the thing is the penciler wants to go in whatever direction they want to go in, and you're not there to change. You're not there to change the direction of the book or the way that the book looks so much that like at some point I was working on some guy's work, and I realized I can't do this anymore. The inking thing is that I'd gotten these pencils in, and I just light boxed them and redrew them, and uh, and then I handed that in, and I just felt like I'm doing a disservice to that guy's artwork because I've changed so much, and it's taken me just as long essentially to draw and ink this whole thing. I was like, what am I doing? So I wound up getting a gig doing a 4-issue miniseries for Platinum Studios Comics.
Yep.
Uh,
The weapon.
yeah, the weapon, yeah, yeah, and that was like $15 a page, and or $10 a page or something like that. And I gladly took it, and I got it done, and I got it colored. Paul Mounts did a tremendous job on the colors, And then it turned out that that writer who had written that story like 4 years before I was given it to draw, he had wound up doing Marvel's kids line, Fred Van Lente. And
I
Fred
just
went,
had him on, incidentally.
oh, really? Fred's a great
Yeah,
guy. I like
yeah.
Fred a lot. And although we have disagreements about Kirby and Stanley, but but
Eh, it's part and
that's
parcel
okay.
of comics, right?
It's in 1,000 years in the future. It's going to be like the Sunnis, Shia. It'll be
Right.
everyone. They have the same. They have the same comics, but it's really one people will be like, it's Steve that did everything.
Exactly.
So anyway, like Fred was really great because by that point he had started working at Marvel, so he showed my work to one of his editors, and I got some work finally penciling some stuff at Marvel, doing I think it was X-Men, or no, it was Wolverine First Class. I think that was the first stuff I did. An Iron Man First Class, or Iron Man. There was like an Iron Man Adventures. I started doing stuff in the kids line basically,
Hmm.
which was great because I was still inking for money basically. So, but I was penciling stuff finally, and I'd ink it too because like there's only three people that have ever inked over me. It's Al Milgrom, Will Eisner, and Wade von Grawbadger. So like I've always inked myself. There's no reason for anybody else to ink over my stuff. So I would ink those things for the kids line, and and I what I noticed about inkers who transition is that there's a transition for inkers as you go up the line. You kind of move from being someone who's being faithful to the pencils to someone who can do finishes,
Hmm.
which is sort of an advanced level of inking. You're spotting the blacks, you're figuring out what the mood's going to be, what the textures are going to be, what the line work is going to be. And a lot of inkers I've seen like become really, because that's the path for them. They become really good at that, but that's not the path into penciling stuff at all. The inkers that I've seen that have been inkers for a long time, they can't make the jump over to pencils because their heads are in a completely different space. So what winds up happening is that I sat down and I was like, well, what's the problem here? And I realized I have to focus on the storytelling first. And I made a decision to kind of keep my inking out of it. Like I make the inking line almost like a dead line, just because I thought it was super important for me to learn how to tell a story, and especially telling stories as clear as I possibly could for the kids line. And I say kids line, it was, they would have us do these done in one stories that
Hmm.
trying to get them into like little trade paperbacks, the little digest size things for the Scholastic market, because Scholastic's like one of the largest distributors of any print that you can even imagine. Because basically they've deputized every single teacher across the United States to sell stuff on their behalf. So these you'll see it in, if you have kids, there's a Scholastic book fair once or twice a year,
Yeah.
and the kids can order whatever books they want for a discount from the schools. So Marvel was trying at the time to get into that book market. So a lot of that stuff wound up in, I do like an Iron Man story or a couple Iron Man stories, or Spider-Man, or Fantastic Four, or so that was a great training ground for me because I was able to kind of pull that across. I was, at the time though, I was still inking over George Perez and Keith Giffen. Keith was a dream to ink over because honestly, I could do 4 pages of Keith's work in like a day. So it was never a challenge for me deadline wise. George was, I could do a page of George's stuff in a day. It's a long day, but
Yeah.
it would be fine. And the thing about guys like Keith and George is you don't have to guess at what they want. There's no me light boxing and changing everything.
Right.
like
Right.
I kind of knew what, the only thing I would have some difficulty with Keith's work is that like sometimes I'd find out what I'm inking over while I'm inking over it. Like I would be inking it, and then I would go, oh, this is an ear. Oh, okay, all right. And then I'd, tighten that up a little bit more, or I'd go, oh, this is a wall, or it's a door, like. But I'd be halfway through the thing, and I'd realize, oh, these are two faces that are right next to one another. Like, okay, I get it. So Keith's stuff was a little more challenging in that way, but George's stuff was great because all I would do for George, it was kind of like. Keith's work, the way I would describe inking his work is like it's scattershot. So it's like it would be all these like millions of lines kind of in service of sort of looking for cohesion. And so I would try and my best to really like find a cohesion for it. And then for George's stuff, it was kind of like it was almost like working from the outside in. So it was like it was almost as if like you had a door that would open up, and then you'd look into this door, and you'd see, like, let's say you're at the grocery store, you'd see like a table there, where the clerk is, and he's got a cash register there, and he's got the little thing that's makes the beeping noise, the scanner, and then you realize that there's people in line, so there's people in line, and then you would pay more attention to that, and you would say, oh, there's like an old woman in line, and then there's a young boy in line, and then you try and figure out what the connection between those two people are. Maybe they're a grandfather and his son, or grandson, grandmother and a grandson, and then like you try and get their poses right, and then all the details that are on the floor, like the floor is a little dirty. So like what would happen is that like with George's stuff, I was able to add little details in because the structure and the storytelling was so strong, and like I kind of would just like fall into a little bit of a trance with it. So if I was drawing, or if I was inking some sort of Legion story, like I would put in little details here and there. Like I loved interlac, so I would just put little interlac things in here and there, and just really trying to tighten up the details and make even more of them. Like every line that George gave me, I gave him three back. You know? But and so I was inking at the same time as I was penciling. So I was juggling all those things and really trying to keep an eye on penciling. When I switched over from inking to penciling almost full time, because I was still inking over Keith for a while, like I realized I had to go to George and say, I can't do this any longer. And George had been having some trouble with his eyesight and his health at the time. So I kind of knew when I told him I kind of felt like I was telling him, I'm not going to be you're not going to be able to do this any longer, really, at the pace and the speed that you're doing this.
Right.
And because I'd been kind of doing finishes even towards the end of what was it, World's Finest, and I realized he was struggling with some stuff. So I called him up and I was like, hey, I'm gonna have to say sayonara as far as inking over it, and I was almost kind of hesitating back and forth on it even when I was talking with him, and he said, you have to take the gig that you've been offered, like, as it was Deadpool at the time. And he's like, you got to do it. Like, this is your shot, like, please go out and do it. And I was like, what a great thing. Like, what he was really enthusiastic. He was really telling me to go for it. And it made a big difference to me, like, oh,
Uh,
so we probably left off 4 hours ago. The middle of whatever story that was.
no, I don't know what happened. I think my
Okay.
internet connection
All right.
just kind of blew for a split second.
Okay.
You were talking about the end of George's. So
Oh,
as you were sort of like trying to transition off and ending your sort of inking over George.
yeah. I called him up and I said, look, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this any longer. And he was really, I was even waffling back and forth on it. Even in the conversation, and he sort of set me straight. He was like, look, this is your chance. You've got to really take it. So I was like, oh, okay. he was really smart about it, and he was really enthusiastic, and he was like, "Look, you've got to do this." And I was like, "You're right, I do have to do this." And but I knew that I was kind of I wasn't like knifing him in the back by leaving. There's a ton of other people that would have inked over him, no problem. But I did feel like I was sort of tripping him up at the last minute there. But but he was really enthusiastic. He was like, "You've got to do this. You've got to, this is your shot." And it made a big difference to me, like, and how I thought about things. So that was really nice. That was the last real inking that I did. I might have done some stuff over Keith because, like I said, if I could do an entire book in a week, like, that makes a big difference. So, and I was making way more money as an inker than I ever was as a penciler. I still, to this day, I made more money as an inker than I ever make as a penciler. But that's just I was fast, as an inker.
Yeah. No,
So
I've heard that from so many others, and it's in fact why I think a lot of artists fall into inking is
yeah,
because you can churn out more pages, and therefore, it's a
yeah.
bit more stable a I
Well,
guess
mentally, yeah, mentally,
career.
it's even a tougher thing for me, because I get to week 5 on an issue, and I'm still not 100% done. Like, I've still got 3 or 4 more pages.
Right,
It's really frustrating to me because I was used to that pace of, by week 5, I'd finished 2.5 issues.
right.
So like it really does screw with my head a little bit. Like I get to, and I feel like I'm always sloughing off, but then you find out that guys take like 20 weeks to do an issue. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not doing so bad. If it takes me 5.5 weeks to get an issue out, I guess I'm all right.
How is it during a run? Like, you did Deadpool, I think, for like 6 years. Does that having being on the same book and the same character start to, I don't know, do you start to internalize things and so therefore get to move a little faster because you
Yes,
kind of, get used to the world and the character and how he
yeah,
moves and things like that?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I, yeah. From the beginning, like when I started working on Deadpool, I didn't really know even what he looked like at the time because I was doing these flashback stories where I could kind of make up whatever I wanted him to look like back in 1980 or 1970, or
Right,
you know what
right.
I mean, like, or 1965 or whatever it was. Like, so I kind of had like a period of a couple months, like almost half a year, where I wasn't drawing him the way he looked at all. So like I kind of got my feet under me, and then when it came time to draw him in the modern day, like I was on top of it. Like, but yeah, it made it a lot. I mean, I know Deadpool, or at least my version of Deadpool, like the back of my hand. I can draw him in my sleep. So, but that's over 6 years, like so. Um, you know, yeah, it does help. I mean, even I just worked on a project called Archie versus Minor Threats, and the Archie characters were all new to me for drawing them. I'd never drawn them before, not even like as a kid drawing them. Like, so like they were a lot for me to internalize and figure out what the structure is, because I got to tell you, those the the facial features from the women, especially from the front or a 3/4 view, are nothing like their profile. So like their nose, I don't know what happens in between. Like an animator, I don't know what they would do, because their nose goes from being this, like, it's almost like a curved triangle,
Right.
to being like really high up, like when the in the profile, it's a really, like, that nose is almost touching their eye, the top part of that nose. So I was really, it took me a lot to, and I would continually get it wrong. They I got close, like I would get like 90% there, and I'd get notes back, but the Archie stuff was tough for me to internalize. And by the end of the 4th issue, I was like, okay, I think I got this. Like I could have gone another 6 years, but too often I wind up on a project that, like, I'll have to learn like a ton of stuff in a short amount of time. And I guess that's kind of my sweet spot at this point. I wind up drawing characters that nobody's ever drawn since they first appeared, or or they, no one's had a crack at them for I don't know, like 50 years or something like that. So I kind of wind up doing like I'm pretty comfortable with research
Right.
at this point. So yeah, so I don't know. It's yeah, I wish that I kind of was on a book for like a lot longer. I really I would enjoy doing that. I have a project of my own that I want to get off the ground and just do that because I'm kind of tired of bouncing around. I've kind of been jackrabbiting
Yeah.
everything. I'll do a 6-pager here or 8-pager there or an issue or a mini series here. I kind of need to have something that I think that I can sink my teeth into and get comfortable with the style.
Right.
I've got a couple projects I'd like to try and it all boils down to money, really. Like, can I afford to take a couple months off? Like I did that about 2 years ago. I took a couple months off and started a project with a writer, and the writer kind of bailed on me. So
Oh,
the project's in like limbo. But it was literally like 5 months of my life, and I was just getting into the swing of things when it collapsed. So I think that rather than rely on anybody else, I'm going to have to do this myself. So it's just a lot to piece together. Anyway,
I'd love to talk about well, I mean, I wish you much luck in getting, that work back off the ground and executed. And similarly, anything else you want to do storytelling wise. But I have to ask about what's behind me and the covers that just came out, which actually kind
yeah,
of started maybe with Deadpool, what was it, 27?
yes,
um,
yeah,
which I think if I read this correctly or saw this correctly, set a Guinness World Record for the most characters to appear on a
yeah.
comic
I
book
even
cover.
have it's on my wall here.
That's it right there.
Yeah, that's the certificate. It's kind of funny because I've blown through that record since.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Up on the wall, yeah. It's kind of funny. Yeah. So
How do you
what?
possibly like conceive of these things and the order and the, you know,
Well, it was
overlappingness and all that kind of stuff?
yeah. It was funny because the first inkling that I had, I there was a so the secret origin of the X-Men, the uncanny X-Men, the second round back in 1975 was that Dave Cockrum had done like this big double page spread of the wedding of I think it's Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel, and then there's a ton of characters in the background, like from all the Legion history, like the Wanderers are there, and the Heroes of Lalor are there, and Dev M, and a whole bunch of other characters that are just sort of floating around in the background, and I just and what the secret origin of the X-Men is that he wanted that page, that double page spread back, and the editor was like, sure, come by and I'll give it to you. And this is back in 73 or 72 or something like that. And the editor in chief at the time, I think it was Carmine Infantino, got wind that one of the editors was trying to save one of the pages for the artist. So he like came in and like forbid him to give him the pages or tore him up. I forget what happened to him. But Cockrum was so pissed off that he left DC and he went over to the X-Men. He took like Nightcrawler and a whole bunch of other characters that he had sort of created. Typhoon, I guess, became Storm. Anyway, but a friend of mine and I were talking about that, and at the same time that I was working on Deadpool, and we were just bandying about that concept where Cockrum left over that double page spread, and I got this. My editor asked me to do. He asked me to do the. It was the issue after the wedding, so it was the honeymoon, right? Is that what happens after a wedding? Honeymoon, right? Yeah.
Yep,
So yeah,
typically,
the honeymoon.
traditionally.
So he asked me to do the honeymoon issue, and I was like, I didn't even know he was getting married. Like, what are you talking about? Like that he's getting married because the book, it was weird. It was, the regular book was chugging along, and then I guess they wanted to experiment with some digital stuff. So in the digital version, Riley Brown had done that, and he meets Shikla, and then they decide to get married at the end of that thing. And I think that they wanted it to be um, they wanted to be more important than it wound up being, because nobody read the secret of digital comics, with the exception of places like webtoons, is nobody reads them. So like we don't have a deep bench of, like, if there's 45,000 people buying Deadpool in a month, then like 2,000 or 1,500 are buying the ability to watch it on the screen there.
Right.
So I didn't know that it was coming. And I was like, "What, you mean he's getting married?" And he was like, "Yeah, he's getting married." And I was like, "Hey, like, I always loved this Cockrum like thing. Could I do like a cover where it's everybody in the background, kind of like that, like, Deadpool's getting married to this character, and there's a best man, and there's all these, bridesmaids and things like that." And I was like, but I want to do like everybody, like, because I kind of thought that I would do everybody that I liked, but then I thought, well, that doesn't work, like it needs to be everybody that's in the modern conception of the comics. So I went into my local comic shop and picked up a whole bunch of Marvel comics off the shelf, and just used those for filling in the background, and I it took me about 9 days, but I was able to do it, and it worked out great, and it looked awesome. Like, and Jordan, my editor, decided that he was going to put it in for a Guinness, and I didn't even know, because I would have put in more characters. Like, I didn't even put Hit Monkey or the Punisher or anything like that. So I could have put way more characters in it if I knew. But at any rate, like, he got me the Guinness there, and then another artist that I met years later. So I'm gonna fast forward it up to get to the stuff that's behind you. Is years later, another artist came up to me, Jamie Sullivan, I think it is, and he said, "Oh, I beat your record," and I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I beat your record on a GI Joe cover, like I had 313," and I was like, "Wow, that's amazing," because I know what it takes to put something like that together. It's a tremendous amount of work. So I was like, "Well, how many did you say it was?" And he's like, 313. And I said, "Well, if I do like a cover with like 315, are you going to come after the record?" And he was like, "No, no, no, no. I'm not going to do that anymore." And I was like, "Well, huh." And then I was thinking about it, and there was a Spider-Man. Well, what happened was is my wife bought me the Marvel. Uh, there's a digital Marvel digital. It's like Marvel Universe or something like that. And she bought me the ability to read like every comic
Oh,
that
right. Yeah.
Marvel ever put together. And I was like, "This is awesome." So it was like for Christmas or something. So I was reading it, and I was like, Spider-Man 1000's got to be coming up. So I was like, let me write them and see if I can't get like Spider-Man 1000, because then that would blow that 313 thing out of the water, and no one's gonna try and come at me after 1,000, So like, so I asked, and then I'd CC'd Tom Brevoort on it, and Tom said, "Well, first off, the editor on Spider-Man said, well, 1,000's a few years away." So, but Tom was like, "Well, Fantastic Four 700's coming up. You want to do something for that?" And I thought, yeah, there's probably 700 characters in Fantastic Four that I can pick and choose, and sure enough, there were. And I did two covers for that, and it turned out great. I loved it. I thought it was awesome. I did the same thing for X-Men like a little while long afterwards, although that was way more characters than that. And then that was about 1,100, I think. And then the one that's behind you is part one of four,
Hmm.
and that's 1,400 characters. And that one I did chronologically. So I started with everybody that was in More Fun #1. I think it's More Fun. It's the first comic that DC, what wound up turning into DC,
Right.
could sort of point back to as their first thing. So I wound up, and I didn't realize this, but More Fun was a anthology. A lot of the comics in the beginning were anthologies. You'd have a page, honestly, or maybe two, and for a particular story. So it was really kind of fun to be able to sort of go and add all those little characters in, because some of them haven't been drawn by anybody in forever. Like the kids in Crystal Ball of History. Um, uh, I forget their names. I think it's like Midge and something or other, or Binky and Midge or something. Anyway, the kids in the Crystal Ball of History, I don't think they've been drawn since the artist had done them, and he was the one of the first African American artists actually
Hmm.
to draw any comics back then too. So he had, I don't think anyone had drawn him since. So like it was kind of fun to be able to, like, sort of sit back and say, hey, like, this is a really fun project. Like I loved I mean, there was a character named Sponge Nose, and just like weird characters that were just kind of in and amongst all these things. And I thought, well, this will be great. I'll start it on the left and I'll get to the modern day stuff, now. And it worked out fine. Like honestly, like way better than I thought it would. Each cover had like an epoch, kind of like. So the first cover is 1935 through about 1947, and the second cover is 47. There's a few stragglers, like I think I forget Sandy, the Wonder Boy or whatever. Sandy wound up on the second cover instead of the first, just because it just wound up that's where he wound up. But the second cover is 47 through about 73. The third cover is 73 through 93, the death of Superman, and then 93 to the modern age. And I didn't run out of characters at all. Like there's so many that I kind of regret. That there's there were 9 different Manhunters, and I only got like the first 3 in or something like that. I wish I'd gotten. There's a character named. It's the female Manhunter. I wish I'd managed to get her in the cover there, the last cover there. But there's a couple characters, and everyone's kind of a little bit of a wise guy. They go like, "Wow, what about this one?" And oftentimes I could kind of go, "Yeah, this character's right here," but sometimes I would go, "Oh, yeah, I didn't get that one in." Like I even when I did the fourth cover, I had a note on the side to remind myself to have Harley Quinn's hyenas in the front. And I noticed that note recently when I was looking at the page, and I was like, oh, I didn't put Harley Quinn's like hyenas in there. So like there's little things here and there that kind of they nag at me, but but 1,400 characters is a lot.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, there's some characters in there that nobody's drawn in forever, and really fun stuff. Like honestly, like I loved all the cartoony characters that were in there. DC doesn't do very much with them any longer, and I loved all the Golden Age characters. Like like they're a blast. They're a hoot, and the Shazam family is fascinating, and DC is kind of modern day DC is kind of like GM Motors. Like GM Motors is General Motors, because they were buying up a whole bunch of different, Cadillac was its own company for
Yeah.
a long time, and then GM bought it. So like, you know, the same kind of thing happened with DC. Like you've got characters from Charlton, you've got characters from the old Quality Comics, which was I guess Will Eisner's shop. Some of them didn't make it over. Like he kept the rights for the Spirit and things like that. But and you'd have all these little groupings, even Wildstorm, if you think of it that way. Like it's been a repository of all these. It's almost literally like the history of comics, all in one kind of company. And I really wanted to celebrate that as best I could, and because you've got really tremendous characters. All the Fawcett characters are in there. The original, even DC, even what we normally think of DC itself, like Flash and the Green Lantern were in one company, and there was another company that had like I want to say like Green Arrow. That's why there's so many characters that have like a, like Green Arrow had his own Arrow Cave and all these things. Like Batman
Right.
had his own like because they were rival
Because
companies at some
yeah,
point.
they were parallel. Yeah.
So they're yeah, parallels being kind, like they would see it work. They would see it work in one company, and then they'd go, "Oh, I want to have my own version of that." So like but when they get bought and sort of jammed together, you're like, well, Green Arrow is kind of a billionaire, recluse, like, fights crime. So, it's you wind up with a couple characters that they have to kind of find a different core. Like Green Arrow is a good example, actually. Like they found a different core for him. Denny O'Neil found a way to write him that I think everybody took, that angry, I don't know, angry liberal, I guess. So like he was like kind of off to the races with a different take on him than Batman. And it helps, to have characters like that you can kind of spin in a different way. Becomes then it's not repetitive, to have Green Arrow hanging out with Batman talking about their car, you know. So and their sidekick, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like yeah. So but anyway, I mean the great thing about that cover was just diving into all the different things. I thought for sure because um, the Charlton characters were the original idea for the Watchmen.
Yep.
That was the original pitch. I thought for sure that they had Peter Ken and Thunderbolt, but they don't. They because that's the character that Ozymandias is sort of taken from, but they don't. So I would run across a whole bunch of things where like DC, like I worked kind of closely with legal because my wife works over at DC, so I was able to really talk to the historian over there, Benjamin, and talk with all the folks over at legal. And I would say, hey, I'd love to have Sasquatch Detective in here, and they'd say, well, you can't, or I'd say I'd love to have the Endless, all the Neil Gaiman characters. Are they his? And they would say, yeah, you can put them in. We have those, and it was interesting to see what characters were sort of spoken for as far as people who owned them still or owned a stake in them. Even the Wildstorm stuff, like not everything made it over from Wildstorm. Like I'm pretty sure Danger Girl it never made it over. So there were characters that I kind of I would inquire about, or some I just knew not even to bother inquiring about, like Danger Girl. So like I would inquire about them, and I get told yes or no. Like, and the process took so long to do. It took me like about 6 or 7 weeks to do a cover. And I was doing other things at the time, but it takes about 6 weeks. So it was a lot to do the research. I would make a huge list of about 300 characters, and I'd try and find places for them. And I would think, who do I want to have like up front? Like I
Right.
thought, one thing I did with the Green Lanterns is that the pose that Alan Scott is in, where he's got the ring, he's holding up the ring on his left hand. I made it the mirror pose for Hal because Hal has his ring on the right hand. And I just made it a mirror pose. And then I thought, well, this is great because then I can keep that pose for all the other Green Lanterns that I'm going to be putting in. And I put them in at the times that they appeared, with the exception of Guy Gardner, who I moved into third place or fourth place after. So it's Alan Scott, Hal Jordan, and then I made it John, even though Guy is there first. The Guy Gardner that is there back in 1960, whatever it is not the Guy Gardner that everybody really
Yeah.
associates with Guy. So I put him in the 80s section, and then it worked out really well because then I could have Guy in there, and then I could have the last cover I think had 5 Green Lanterns on it, or maybe 6. There's Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz and Teen Lantern, and so you got like a whole bunch of different ones that were I was able to sort of put in the same pose. So there's a structure to the covers that I was able to sort of maintain. Like to sort of put in sort of give it some cohesion, you know.
Right.
And then I tried to once I put the car in the first one, because I was going to put Superman. I couldn't figure out what pose to put Superman in. The first appearance that he's in, he's throwing that Ford. It's a Ford car.
Yeah.
Uh, Throwing a Ford at somebody, you know, and everyone's running around with their heads on fire because there's a maniac throwing a Ford. So I thought, well, I could either do that or the first Superman, like as a Superman, it's kind of also equally famous where he's uh he's kind of leaping up in the air and flying, but he's sort of pointing down. And I think that's from Superman #1 or something like that. But I thought if I do that, I'm going to have to draw the car, the first one. If I do the first appearance, I'm going to have to draw the car. And I was like, well, that's just going to take up so much
Oh
territory
yeah.
and
Right.
space. But I thought, well, the car is green, and then I could put Dr. Fate in front of it, and he'd look good in front of it, the blue and the yellow. And then I thought, well, that's pretty good. Like I can wrap Plastic Man around it, and then that's the red and yellow there, you know. And I just thought
Yep.
it would look beautiful if I did that. And then I was like, I'm gonna have Woozy Winks driving the car, you know, like I had, and then Lois Lane sitting on the backs, you know, the back of the car, like, and then I just had Superman in there. I probably shouldn't have put so many people in front of Superman, but I still wanted to put all the characters that I could, you know, like a lot of the kids were up front, you know, or the people kneeling down, you know. So anyway, like once I did that, I was like, well, I've got a car in here, and then I was in the middle of the second one, and I was talking with my wife, and I go, well, geez, you know, like I've got this. I don't know how to do haunted tank because I kind of like most people would do haunted tank with the the general, the Confederate general that's Stewart or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Jeb Stewart. So most people would throw him in there, but I was like, I just wasn't feeling like in a Confederate general kind of mood. So like, I just was kind of like, what do I do here? And I was like, I got a tank how am I going to fit? And my wife was like, well, just have everybody on top of the tank. And I was like, right, this works out really well. So like I put the tank in the second one, and that worked out great because then I could put people on top. Like I put the Challengers of the Unknown on top of the tank, and I put Astra on top of the tank. Like they gave me some ability to have a front row of interest, and then like a second tier where you're still you know, they still appear very important. You know what I mean? Because I really, that was the thing I struggled with, is I wanted to make sure that there was like interest, like a lot of interesting characters had their shining moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because I even doing the research, I loved all of them. Like, I loved a Kid Eternity. You know what I mean? Like, I loved all these characters that I would. Astra was amazing. So, like, I thought, well, I've got to have some way of putting. And then Lori Lamaris was always one of my favorites. So I was like, how do I put Lori and put it there? Because she's got fish legs. She doesn't really have legs. She's a fish tail. And I was like, well, how can I put her off of the ground here? Because I didn't really want to put her on the ground. It seemed kind of disrespectful. So I put her on the tank. You know what I mean? Like that worked out pretty well. And then even when I got to Watchmen, I was like, well, on the third cover, I was like, well, this is going to be great because then I can put in the Owlmobile, you know. So it just worked out pretty well that way. Like some things were serendipity, you know. Like I would do one thing, I'd have enough time to think about it and do another thing somewhere else, you know. Like so it a lot of it was kind of catch as catch can. I had a general idea of where I wanted to put some of the characters. Like maybe when I would look at a cover, I know where I want to put about 30 of them. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd want to make sure that Dr. Manhattan is front and center. I want to make sure that Apollo from Stormwatch is in there. I want to make sure that I've got, you know, and with those characters, I can have them floating in a little bit, you know, so I'd have them up off the ground. And I'd sit there and I'd say, well, you know, some of the kid characters I can have all up in the front, and some of the main characters I can have them up there. Like I'd have Two Face on standing on the ground, or but then as it got further and further into the tier, they get a little smaller.
Right.
So like that helped with some of the characters I didn't really care that much about. Like there's a group of characters, the OSS squad or something like that. Like, and I didn't those guys didn't matter too much to me. But like, but I did. There's one character called Atmosphere, like Fear, that I love that guy's name. Some of these characters were like a real eye opener, like where you're just like, wow, someone came up with a pun and tried to make it kind of a character that would make a
Fit.
lasting impression. I don't think Atmosphere made it, but like it was a great idea. But like the Red Bee, like I kind of put him where like Green Arrow is in his way.
Right.
How end up happening is that you make these little connections, like so like the Red Bee is kind of upset. So he looks upset. He's been forgotten, to be honest. So like, with the exception of I'm sure like 15 people out there. So it's kind of fun to be able to put him in there and have him not really thought very much of. But the funny thing about like the a lot of the characters, so you can almost kind of see there's a lot of characters that are kind of they're related to the culture in that there's like a war that
Yep.
happened. So there's a lot of white characters at the beginning, and then there's just a lot of Asian characters, or there's some Native American characters that are in there. And then in the 50s, there's a lot of Native American characters, still no black characters, but like once we hit the mid 60s, it starts up, and by the 80s and 90s and aughts, like we're starting to catch up with the culture as it actually evolves. And even I looked back, and the demographics for the country changed a lot over the years as well. So, you would have like a large black population that maintains itself, but you'd have an Asian population that comes from like Vietnam War or China. They reduced or they got rid of there were controls on the amount of people that could come in before 1965. So like it's really interesting to see the culture shift and change over that period of time as well. So it's almost like having like a almost like a photograph really of like how America kind of thought of itself all the way through to how it thinks of itself now, and it was fascinating to kind of go through because you get a lot of characters that are like the children of other characters, or you get a lot of characters that are kind of they'll take a concept like Manhunter and they'll rework it. Like they'll say, well, how can we update this to in a way that's going to be interesting to like a modern audience? So that's not stuck in the past. You think of characters like Green Hornet or the or Zorro and things like that. These are characters that in a shadow. These are characters that are just kind of stuck. They're like in amber. So you wind up telling stories if you tell stories about them at all, like the Shadow or the Green Hornet. You wind up sort of telling stories about them as if it's 1945. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of stuck with these characters being that way. And the great thing about some of the other characters that DC has, like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, is that they've managed to, and it's a testament to honestly to their stewardship over these characters, is that they're modern. You can have a Superman movie and it has it has a whole bunch of things that you can kind of point to the modern culture in, like how does Superman navigate being a good person in a world that honestly has no interest in good people, like at times, or at least it feels that way sometimes. So like um, whereas with Green Hornet, you're just stuck with like Green Hornet in 1945 or the Shadow in 1945. It's just these characters don't they get stuck somehow in amber, and they have a difficult time making that jump. So I have to hand it to them, to take 9 swipes at Manhunter and continually try to evolve this concept of Manhunter, or evolve the concept of the Suicide Squad, or evolve the concept of how the Justice League works together, like that kind of thing. It's just fascinating to me. So I don't know, that the cover really had made me think a lot
Yeah.
over the last year. So it was just a lot of fun to do,
I
and
would
I hope.
imagine. I mean, turned out magnificently, and you can see the passion behind it. And how could you do something of this scale if you didn't have sort of the interest behind it and, doing all the research and really gathering all of that information together. So
I love comics.
kudos. And we're back. Hey, Scott, thanks for being on the show. You gave us a lot of your time. Scott's a big talker. We like that around here. We'll just put it all out there, and you guys get a lot more in your episode. So, thanks, Scott. You're welcome back anytime, as are virtually all of our guests. I'd say all of them. And that'll do it for today's episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening, for viewing, for rating, reviewing, subscribing. And we will see you for one more episode this week.